everyone! Last week I showed you how I started constructing the shoe dresser that I got plans to from Anna White's website. If you're interested in building stuff, then you should go check out her website. She has over 1,000 free plans up there, starting from starter projects all the way to advanced projects. So she's got a little bit of everything for everyone. If you missed last week's video, then I'll leave a link to it right here. Go check it out if you're interested in seeing how to build this thing. And this week I'm showing you guys how I finished it, so let's get started. You'll need wood glue, a handsaw, a hammer, sandpaper and or an orbital sander, 3/8 inch wood dowel pins, 1.5 inches long. I actually ended up just buying some 3/8 inch regular dowel that I cut into 2-inch pieces. 4 magnetic cabinet clasps, an old leather belt, drawer pulls. I'm actually going to use another old belt to make mine. Finishing materials. I used a 2-in-1 stain poly finish that I applied with a glove and a sock. And of course, safety gear, goggles, a dust mask, hearing protection, etc. Before completely assembling it, I decided to sand and mostly stain it because I thought it would be easier to get into some of those hard to reach places before assembly. Use a rotary sander to sand the crap out of this thing. Of course you can hand sand it, but the rotary sander just makes it way faster. Make sure to sand off any pencil marks or any other marking on the wood. Start with a heavy grit and work your way down to a smaller grit to make it nice and smooth. I only did one pass with a heavy grit and then another with a smaller finishing grit paper because I'm impatient and I really wanted this thing to be done so I could go and admire it. Ideally, you would want to do more passes. After sanding, wipe everything down with a damp cloth to remove the dust and then you can apply your finish. I used a 2-in-1 stain and polyurethane finish, which totally says not to shake it before use, and I applied it using the sock method. Basically, you throw on a glove and then put your sock over that and simply dip the sock in and rub the finish onto the wood. Obviously, you'd want to follow the directions on whatever kind of finish you use. For the 2-in-1 thing I'm using, it's like normal stain where you apply it in a thin layer and rub it in following the grain of the wood. I applied the finish everywhere except for the sides. I also didn't bother finishing the inside of the drawers. They weren't going to be seen, and initially I was worried about not having enough stain, which I totally would have had enough, but at that point I wasn't sure and I was just being careful. Let the finish dry completely before this next step. Time to install the drawers. The ground out here is really uneven, so I couldn't put it down face first onto the ground and stick the dowels in, so I had to figure out how to raise the drawers up 1/8 of an inch to match the holes that I had drilled earlier. It turns out that one of the belts that I got for this project was a perfect 1/8 inch. So I just laid that down, stuck the drawer in, and it lined up perfectly. I believe paint stir sticks are about 1/8 inch as well, so that could be an option if you couldn't find anything else that would work. Insert the dowel. I just pushed it in as far as I could by hand, and then I tapped it in with a hammer the rest of the way. I was also worried about the dowels coming out after repeated opening and closing, so I attempted to apply glue so that it would only be gluing the dowel to the outer shell of the dresser. I don't know how well that would work, or if it was even necessary, as there's no mention of gluing these things in place in Anna's plans, as far as I saw, but I guess I'll find out. If you do use glue, please make sure that you don't put too much glue and end up gluing everything together so it doesn't even want to open anymore. I slid the belt to the other side and repeated the process. I purposely cut the dowels to be a little bit longer than I needed because I wanted to be able to tap the drawer in place with a 1/8 inch gap on each side, and then to be able to cut it completely flush with the side. When you have the drawers in place with the 1/8 inch gap on each side, use a handsaw to cut the extra dowel off. Sand smooth and finally finish the sides. After After I let that dry, I went back and applied a second coat of finish all over the whole piece again. This time I wasn't too worried about hitting those hard to reach spots. I just concentrated on what would be seen. The hard to see spots at least had one coat of stain, so they wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb like they would have with absolutely no finish. Once that finished drying, I lugged the whole thing inside to do the finishing touches. To install the magnetic cabinet clasps, screw in the metal plate onto the edge of one of the drawer sides like so, about 1/2 inch from the drawer backing. Push the drawer so that the top of it is flush with the rest of the dresser, and then you can stick the magnet part of the clasp onto the plate and screw it in place into the side of the dresser. Now that magnet should hold the drawer up so it'll always be flush in the front. In addition to that, it'll also keep the drawers from flopping open after it's full of shoes. Repeat on the other side, and then for the other drawer. Open the drawer and figure out the maximum amount that you'd ever want the drawer to be open. You might have to have someone help you hold the drawer in place while you do this step, or you can strategically lean it against something like I did. Cut a piece of leather belt and screw it in place. One end on one of the drawer backing pieces, and the other end on the middle piece of wood. Repeat on the other side so you have a total of 2 straps on one drawer. Repeat for the other drawer. Attach your handles. I had been wanting to do these neat old leather belt handles that I saw somewhere on the internet, and I can't exactly remember where, but this project ended up being perfect for it. You basically just take a piece of old belt, loop it, and screw it into the drawer. The loop can be as big or as small as you want. I believe I cut 8-inch pieces of belt, so after looping them, they ended up being about 4 inches tall. First, I marked where I wanted the handles to go. I went 2 inches down and 6 inches in from each side and drilled the holes with a 1/4 inch bit. Then I drilled holes on each end of the belt pieces. Then I folded the belt, threaded it onto a 1 1/4 inch long bolt, stuck it through the wood, and screwed on a nut. And then I repeated that for each handle. Now that's left is to install the whole thing in place. This is what our shoe situation looked like before. I didn't get footage of the old rack that we used to use, but you can see it there disassembled in the corner. To install this thing, you need to find the studs. I borrowed this super cool magnetic stud finder from a friend. You slowly move it around the wall, and then when it finds a stud nail, it sticks right to it. After I found one stud nail, I marked it, and then I moved the stud finder upwards to find the next one in that stud, and connected those marks using a ruler and a pencil. You want to find at least 2 studs to screw this into. Once you've marked where your studs are, it's just a matter of placing the dresser where you want it, drilling pilot holes through the cleat and into the stud, and then screwing it into the wall. I used 2-inch screws for this. It also helps if you have a nice person to help you hold the thing in place while you're drilling the holes and screwing it in. And finally, it's done. This was quite a project. It turned out almost exactly how I wanted it to. The only issues are a little bit of wonkiness from using the jigsaw to cut the boards, but for my first real piece of furniture, I'm pretty darn happy with how it came out. And even if you don't think that you'd tackle this beast, I hope that I was able to teach you a few new things, whether that be the sock method of staining wood, or how to make an old belt into looped handles, or whatever. And if you do decide to take on this project, I'd love to see how it turns out. And I'm sure Anna White would too. I hope you all enjoyed this week's project. If you did, please leave a like. If you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. I post DIY videos every Thursday. As I mentioned before, tune in next week and you'll see what I make with some of the scrap from this project. You can follow me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or Pinterest, and I'll leave the information to those down below. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next week.